Well, for some analysis on Emmanuel Macron's vaccination strategy and the political fallout from it, we can speak to Andrew Smith, a historian of modern France and a senior lecturer at the University of Chichester. Professor Smith, thank you so much for joining us here on France 24. Many of Macron's rivals are holding campaign rallies this Saturday. How do you see them capitalizing on his vaccination stance?
It's a challenging one. As you mentioned, of course, one of the telling outcomes of this discussion has been an uptick in the number of people taking up their first vaccines. Likewise, the first polls that have come out show Emmanuel Macron remaining steady in terms of his overall popularity rating. So ultimately, it looks like, in the first count, as it were, that Macron's calculated outburst, shall we say, in that interview has been relatively successful. Of course, we saw from his opponents the type of things that they were trying to do. They were talking about the idea that this was undignified. It was the kind of thing that presidents shouldn't say. But also they hit upon another important point, which was this idea of dividing the French. Of course, we know the comments you've heard already many times about their context, about Pompidou using them to a young Jacques Chirac, to talk about cutting through red tape. And of course, what we get from this idea is that Macron's talking about trying to shift the burden of all this red tape and bureaucracy and COVID checking onto the people that aren't taking action to do it, rather than leaving it with the majority of French people who are, the over 90% of people who are vaccinated. And we can see the logic in that to an extent. And also we can see the logic in trying to use phrases like this to dominate the news agenda. Everyone's talking about Emmanuel Macron, everyone's talking about his vaccination strategy. So there is certainly a logic to this. But of course, people like Valérie Pécresse, one of his principal rivals for the Républicains, is talking about the idea of a sort of irresponsibility of the president, an idea that he is pushing France towards division. Now, this is tough because it's a tough place to side yourself. The Republicans were divided in terms of how they voted their deputies in the Assembly on this vaccine bill. They were pretty much split equally in thirds. They had about a third voted for the vaccine pass, about a third said they were against it, and about a third abstained. So for some of Macron's opponents, especially in LR, the support for the vaccine bill of their leader isn't necessarily carrying right through the party. And so it's a tough one to say that they're necessarily capitalising on it immediately, I think.
And you mentioned that sort of shifting of the political debate. Before Macron's comment about vaccines, the debate had been really centered around French identity after the replacement of the French flag with the European flag at the Arc de Triomphe. Do you think that was a strategy by Emmanuel Macron to draw the debate sort of back to the pandemic? Is that safer territory for Macron than French identity is?
I think in some ways it probably is. I think one of the key strategies for Valérie Pécresse, as we've seen, is to kind of try and straddle the right and kind of towards the far right, as it were. And we already know she won out against Ciotti in her primary within the party, and she has to win over a lot of those voters. She also has to try and take some from Macron, the kind of people who voted for Fillon, but then Macron won round last time. So Valérie Pécresse obviously has a clear issue that she wants to address around ideas of identity. Macron trying to steer things back towards the idea of governance, the idea of looking at what's happening. And I think this is another context in which those comments really try to make, I guess, what is the ordinary business of governance look exciting and look like he's doing something different rather than just his job, as it were. Of course, Macron remains not yet a candidate, but I think ever more what we're seeing in trying to steer the debate towards successes, in trying to steer the debate towards the idea of the small victories he can claim, I think we're starting to see there more of the candidate Macron as well. And these kind of comm strategies to dominate the political agenda, I can imagine, will only increase, and perhaps from his opponents as well.
All right, Andrew Smith, a historian of modern France and senior lecturer at the University of Chichester. Thank you very much for speaking with us today.